Welcome to the Food Professor Podcast, presented by Caddle. Season 4, Episode 22. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm the Food Professor, Sylvain Charlebois.
Our very special guest this week on the pod is Colleen Martin, Chief Revenue Officer for Caddle, who will be a regular contributor on the show, bringing insights and custom research. And, you know, Colleen is we've known a wonderful, wonderful person and a multifaceted and savvy business leader. And I would say a welcome addition to the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And Colleen and I, we've done many webinars together, and we clicked. I mean, what can I say? She's like my sister from another mother, and she's just great. Lots of energy, lots of ideas, lots of experience too, and a tremendous triathlete, if I may add.
Just for the listeners, so this episode is kind of a feature interview because we wanted to just introduce her as like a feature interview, and then talk a little bit about how the sausage is made, so to speak, how research is done, and in general. But then in subsequent episodes, we'll have her back like once a month, kind of thing.
Actual research you're talking about, not the research we get from the Bank of Canada. Is that what you're talking about?
Boom. That's right. Actual research.
Ouch. Isn't this podcast about opinions, though? Huh?
Well, a little bit of a mix of both. Let's get into the news. So the hot news right now, as of today, is this hot topic of dynamic pricing, something Uber calls surge pricing, and something the president of Wendy's quickly jumped into the media today saying he never said, which is true. I went back and reviewed the notes. He never said surge pricing. The media said surge pricing, but it caused a firestorm. They're trying to put that firestorm out. Explain to the people what dynamic pricing is.
Actually, I wrote an op-ed today on what he said, and I actually didn't write surge. I actually didn't know that it was reported that he said surge pricing. Dynamic pricing is not that at all. I mean, it's more about managing inputs and create this idealistic equilibrium between supply and demand. And to be honest, for the industry, it's the future. I mean, and I you know this, Michael, but a lot of companies are doing it already.
Well, my goodness, see everyone on an airplane. I mean, it's all around us, right? I mean,
no, but in the food industry. I mean, it's already happening in the food industry. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like in retail and service. And so when I saw the announcement earlier this week, I felt, okay, so what's the big deal? But to me, the big deal was that he actually made a public announcement about it. And I was going, how can this be good? How can this sit well with consumers? Like, why would you talk about this openly with the public? But I know that he did talk about this in an open call with investors, not necessarily to the public. But as you know, whenever you do a call, a lot of people listen in. And so I actually think it was a bit of a mistake just to talk about this, because we all know in QSR, in retail, there's going to be more influence coming from AI. Predictive analytics are going to be key for anyone's business with low margins. Knowing what your demand will look like next hour, next week, next month, understanding how you can influence demand is absolutely going to be critical for many businesses in the space. And so to me, it made sense. But again, I was very critical of Wendy's outing, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, my mind went back when I heard it back to, and I was involved in I just remember at the early days, I think it was 2005, early 2000s, when Coke or Pepsi said, hey, we're going to dynamically price our vending machines, and when it's hot, we're going to charge you more, which, you know.
When was that?
That was early, a couple of decades ago. It was the first kind of, you know, hey, we got now sophisticated machines that can tell the temperature, so we're going to dynamically price on how much the beverage is coming out of the vending machine. And of course, the public blowback beat that notion right out of them real quick. And you know, my thinking was, listen, if you're going to have dynamic pricing and you're going to do plus or minuses, it's got to have some, you know, it can't be just based on supply and demand. It's got to be some value to the customer. I could see, for example, dynamic pricing in a Wendy's where it's a slow time and you drop prices, and that, you know, that adds a lot of value to consumers and to them.
No, dynamic pricing is up and down. It's both. It goes both ways. Absolutely. Okay, this is not just about increasing prices at peak. It's also about bringing down prices when business is low. But here's the thing. With dynamic pricing, you want your customer base to know what's going on too. If you say, you know what, looking at what's going on today, in 2 hours, my guess is that hamburgers will be half price from, I don't know, 9:30 p.m. to 11 p.m., something like that. And because you get rid of your inventory, you create a dynamic marketplace. So there needs to be some incentives here. Right now, the way it was positioned, the way it was presented was it's all about higher prices. Yeah, or interpreted. It was all about high prices, but dynamic pricing is not that all. It's about optimizing. It's about optimizing demand management.
The lesson I took away from that was consumers are very sensitive right now, like hypersensitive. And this is a nice segue into the next story. Let them eat cereal, says the president of Kellogg's or Kellanova or whatever the hell they're called now, offering North American peasants an option for fiscal relief by substituting cornflakes or Fruit Loops for dinner instead of those expensive other
Let's have
options.
Fruit Loops for dinner, Father.
Maybe an example of what he should have said is nothing. Again, it's a very similar situation. I'm talking to the business press. This is a business strategy. We think we can grow our share. People, it's not unusual if you watch every now and then you have a bowl of cereal for whatever as a break, late night snack. But I think, again, the sensitivity of food pricing right now, again, maybe an example of what he should have said is
his message
nothing.
was so un-Canadian. He is clearly an American. He doesn't know how much Canadian milk costs.
Better have a side of chicken. You're better off with a roast chicken from Costco, I think.
No, but seriously, it was again. I understand what he was trying to do, but you need to sympathize with the public. A lot of people do eat breakfast cereal for dinner.
Not just for breakfast anymore. Sure, why not?
My kids do that once in a while. It's movie night on Friday. Why not? But if you're forced to eat breakfast cereal, that's a different story. And you're not going to be laughing at that.
Anyway, lessons learned. We're all about lessons learned here. So,
did he say anything afterwards?
Let's hope not. just say nothing.
Here's the irony. First of all, you need milk to eat cereal, which is really expensive. And also, most of his boxes have actually shrunk in the last 2-3 years.
Yeah.
So not
Masters
good.
of shrinkflation a little bit. But anyway, I think in this scenario, the best thing to say is
I just got to ask you a question. If you were to eat Kellogg cereal at night forever, which one would you pick?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not a big cereal eater. I was in my youth. I like the Frosted Flake because I like a bit of sugar. They're great. I don't mind a bit of cereal every now and then. I don't eat it very often. It's just not part of my thing. I liked Fruit Loops when I was growing up. I used to eat them raw out of the box, uncooked with milk out of the box. That's a bad habit I broke.
That's just sugar, man.
That's just it's terrible. Anyway,
still have teeth?
Yeah. Yes and no.
I'm a meanie wheats kind of guy, though.
Mr. Healthy.
I love. Healthy.
Let's stay in the U.S. and grocery. H-E-B. Have you heard of H-E-B in Texas? Do you know H-E-B as a grocery?
Yes, I've heard.
The H-E-B takes the number one spot in a consumer survey by Dunnhumby, which is a very well-respected company that analyzes things in grocery. 6th annual retail preference index in America. 30,000 customers. It's a fascinating story because H-E-B, they're about a $40 billion retailer, 430 stores, only in Texas and Mexico. That's it. Very narrow, and but they're beloved. Like I have some friends in the barbecue community in El Paso, and I will be visiting H-E-B because I'm going to Dallas and Austin on a little Texas tour.
Everything's big in Texas.
Well, listen, $38 billion, and they're only in one state, right? And Mexico. So,
but it's in Texas.
So let's turn our minds to what's going on in the U.S. The U.S. Justice Department sues Albertsons Kroger. Big news here.
Yeah, the Federal Trade Commission, which is the equivalent to the Competition Bureau for people listening in.
Well, and what I thought was interesting, and I'd love to get your perspective. I don't know if you read the actual report, but they said that they thought it would have impacts on consumers from a pricing perspective. I think that's tough to prove from my perspective. That's the hardest thing to prove. But they also, for the first time, I don't remember seeing this in any of their judgments on any file, that they had a long discussion around the impact on employees and their ability. And then they took a very dim view of the, they put out in advance, they being Kroger and Albertsons, they were going to, shed 400 stores. And, it just didn't pass the mustard. So what did you think of, what did you think of this? And are there any lessons here for us from this big, what's going to be a big fight in the U.S.?
Well, Washington has been on this since day one, as you know. I mean, so I'm not, essentially, we all know that Washington is against the deal politically, and they're going to do everything it can to make sure it doesn't happen, basically. And if I were Kroger, I don't know, like I would count my beans. I mean, seriously, this is becoming a struggle, and I think the environment is just not allowing them to do anything. I would wait a while. I mean, I don't think anyone will buy anybody, but in Canada, I don't think it would ever happen, ever. And I spoke to someone earlier this week.
I mean, the order of magnitude, I guess, would be if you'd ever imagine Metro and Sobeys.
It would be Sobeys
together,
buying
right?
Metro.
Like the order of magnitude. And by the way, it's not just Washington, which is another interesting thing I learned. There's a lot of U.S. states who also threw their hat in the ring to block. You know what? It's interesting because it kind of waterfalls down to everything we've been talking about so far in the episode, the sensitivity around food. Maybe if they would have done this 2 years ago or 2 years from today.
The environment is completely different, which is why I think I would, if I were Kroger, I would count my beans, go away for a while, wait it out. Inflation will drop. People will calm down. And then perhaps at some point you go ahead. I mean, right now is just not the right time. And of course, there's a presidential election coming up. And whenever it's a presidential year, things are really, really sensitive in America. In Canada, I would say that I don't think it would ever happen. And like I was saying earlier, I was talking to someone from Ottawa about, well, what kind of bureau do we want? And I said, certainly not the one we have now. And we spoke about Bill C-56, the bill that gave a little bit more power to the Bureau before the holidays. It was it received its royal assent. I think it was before the holidays, and they basically are getting more power. But at the end of the day, you need humans to be gutsy, to be bold, and the Bureau will always seems to be afraid of lawsuits and being pushed back or pushed around by grocers or any company for that matter. Because I mean, I've always believed that there's a wrong culture in the industry, and it's not just about grocers. There's something going on here that requires more discipline, which is why I've always been a supporter of the code of conduct. And so that's where I'm coming from. I think the industry just needs more discipline up the food chain in order to bring more stability at retail.
Let's talk about one more thing before we move on to our interview with Colleen. New York Times article, and then it was picked up by CNN about the lead poisoning. Through applesauce.
Was it covered by an English newspaper in Canada by any chance? It was covered by La Presse, and I was interviewed by Daphne Cameron, who's a great reporter in Montreal at La Presse. But
I haven't seen it.
I didn't see anything else. I mean, I think this is a huge scandal.
Well, I wanted to ask you. I mean, the theme of the New York Times in-depth article was how, so many people just took the certification from their vendors and a long chain of certification of vendors of cinnamon that turned out to be that have huge amounts of lead in it. And I guess my question is, it's because of the equipment
used to grind the cinnamon that got cinnamon to be contaminated by lead. Essentially, that's what happens. I was actually I've been involved in a few global investigations like this one. And I must say, Michael, I was actually quite impressed that they actually know the cause, like they know what happened. I mean, we're talking about global supply chains. Things get really messy out there. Like, at what point, though, like, take us to the Canadian context. CFIA, I know you have a lot of respect for them in terms of measuring and testing and safety. Is this something that could happen in Canada? Like, can everyone in the supply chain just rely on
piece of paper from somebody else without actually random testing product?
I see no evidence suggesting, at least to me, that this wouldn't happen in Canada. It could. I think it could.
So the same fault lines exist.
I mean, the FDA has more clout internationally. They actually go out and will inspect in situ in different countries, brokers, manufacturing plants, all the food going to America, they actually inspect over there a lot more than the CFIA. The CFIA has started to really look at risks in situ beyond our borders, but we're not at the same level as the FDA. But
is there a role for the grocers, though? Is there a role for grocers to say, I'm going to randomly test products across a wide spectrum of things every now and then, just ongoing? They're all very sophisticated, just to make sure.
Well, yeah, no, it reminded me of, it's funny because I know it's not food, but it reminded me of the Joe Fresh scandal that affected Loblaw in 2013. Do you remember Joe Fresh? When the Bangladesh building that collapsed and killed many, many people, it became a scandal because all of a sudden you saw the working poor, people working in very poor conditions, manufacturing garments for Canadians. And we saw a building collapse. And I remember inviting the VP of Loblaw to my class in Guelph a month after the collapse to explain to my students what happened. And he walked us through how they managed the crisis and how Loblaw decided to stay in Bangladesh, rebuild the community, rebuild the building, and accommodate all of the victims, which I thought was really grand. It was really, I thought Loblaw really did a good job. But since then, my guess is that Loblaw is very careful with how it manages global supply chains and will go to different sites to make sure that risks are properly managed. So, and especially when the President's Choice brand and no-name brand is concerned. I mean, you know that these brands are really precious for them. So I actually do think that Loblaw is more careful. I can't speak for other grocers, but my guess is that the onus is on grocers to make sure that these things are mitigated. And the CFIA, I don't think, has the capacity to do more than, say, the FDA in America. But let the children, like children hospitalized, that's just not good.
It is the very opposite of good, for sure. Yeah. So anyway, there you go. Applesauce in a pouch.
And by the way, just for people listening in, we don't know how many children were hospitalized, but we know it's in the hundreds.
Yeah, and we don't know the long-term effects, right? Because we've seen these things of delay, right? Developmental delay. So it's there's no good about this story. Maybe there'll be some good outcomes in terms of, like crises like what happened in Bangladesh. That it's a wake-up call, perhaps.
Yep.
But it is a complex.
I think Loblaw's
right?
is a better company as a result of the Joe Fresh scandal, to be honest. And today, look at 11 years later, nobody's talking about it.
All right, well, let's take a break and have a listen to our interview with Colleen Martin and a few words, actually, first about what they have to offer to the listeners as well. Ever feel like the world of ratings and reviews needed a superhero? Well, enter Caddle, the caped crusader with Canada's largest, most diverse, and daily active consumer panels. That's right. Caddle is not your average podcast sponsor. So why choose Caddle? Because Caddle excels in consumer insights from your consumer while also blazing trails in the realm of ratings and reviews, pioneering the future landscape of user-generated content. Beyond the valuable syndicated receipt data, they stand as unparalleled collector of reviews at scale, irrespective of category or price point. A testament to their impact, partnerships with giants like Walmart, Canadian Tire, and more. Visit AskCaddle.com now for an exclusive The Food Professor podcast listener discount on your first review or research campaign today. That's AskCaddle.com.
Colleen Martin is joining us on our podcast this week. She's been on our podcast before, but now she is a partner. She's going to be working with us on a regular basis. She'll be visiting in, I think, once a month or so. Caddle is so busy, lots going on. So Michael and I thought of bringing in Colleen from time to time to talk to us about some of the things that are going on at Caddle, things that they're discovering about the Canadian market. So, Colleen, welcome back.
Thank you both. You are both some of my favorite humans, and it's a pleasure to be here, and even more of an honor to be a partner this year.
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, it's great. I couldn't think of a better partner for this podcast for sure. So, I guess Colleen, as our first chat, perhaps you can talk to us a little bit more about how Caddle works. So, how do you do your work? What are the mechanics behind your surveying, the data that you have? So, talk to us more about what's going on there.
Yes, Caddle is so many things. We are the voice of the consumer. And that is what makes us a great partner for you guys, in that we really care about ensuring our brand and retail partners understand what their consumer is looking for. And I've been in this business 25 years of retail, like 10,000 hours were carved at retail and at brands and as a consultant. And one of the underserved needs is just the targeted market, understanding what that consumer is looking for, and having an agile access to these people. And Ransom Hawley is the founder of Caddle. It's been around for 8 years now. And when he was at S.E. Johnson, he was like, there's got to be a better way to get consumers to like a representative sample of what my consumer's thinking about. And he worked in various roles there in marketing and sales. So it was a natural thing for him to start his own company and develop a really large panel. Caddle has the largest panel in Canada. We have the most daily actives. We have 10 to 15,000 people active daily on our panel.
So impressive.
It's massive, but we reward them. It's an exchange of data for small amounts of cash, right? So we, rather than scraping data from platforms like social media, we build a relationship with each panel member saying, we're going to pay you to tell us what you think. And we want your receipts. We want your reviews for everything on your receipts. And we're going to pay you for that. We're not going to just take it from you. And we've built a trust and a sense of agency among this panel, which is, led us to work with some great companies like Deloitte and Veronix and Nielsen and Ipsos, helping them find the white spaces and fill their panels out because of our diversity and because of our daily activity. So we've been able to do all sorts of research. If you have a targeted market, even if we've got a lot of alcohol brands trying to serve new emerging Southeast Asian markets here, or consumers in Canada, and we've been able to isolate very specific audiences for them to test their labels, to test flavor profiles, to understand what they like and their intent, and if they're brand switching and what they like from what brands they like from the countries they came from. So we are able to get that granular, and that's an extreme example, but I think working at Caddle since 2020 has been kind of a culmination of all the skills that I've built throughout my career with the consumer in mind, starting at store level and all the way into working with brand and insights teams to help them isolate if the new product will work.
Oh, it's been wonderful. As a scientist, as you know, Colin, as a group, we've been able to use Caddle data and publish in academic journals over the last few years. So the data is incredibly valuable. Now, could you tell us more about the process? How do you get all of the stuff that or you get from your respondents and take that data and make sense out of it?
We're custom, like on that side of our business, the custom research side of our business, we work with the teams directly as a partner. So myself or Ransom, we will go in and meet with the insights team and try to understand, what are you trying to find out? Like, what is it that you're looking to do? What are your goals and objectives? And what's the strategy for this product or brand? And we have a research team internally that would develop the questionnaire and the methodology of the survey based on your needs. Like, we don't, try to move you into a standardized approach, because sometimes you just need to do things a little bit differently if the product or service or brand requires it. So we would develop that survey and then field it. Usually it takes 1 or 2 days in field, and then we would have the team go through and QC the data to make sure that there's no straight lining, things like that. So we sample a larger audience and kick out the things that look a little sketchy. And then we would aggregate that data, present it to you, and we would even build your retailer deck if you'd need it. So it's a full service group, and it happens very, very quickly. Usually it takes around 14 days to get a pretty significant piece of custom research done and presented.
So, as we think about how the sausage is made, so to speak, which is appropriate for this a food podcast, so take it in a more practical kind of layman's sense of, so you're on a panel and you get an email from you guys. Would you like to participate in a survey? Like, is it that straightforward? And you kind of ping people with some introductory questions to see if they're suitable to answer the survey and all that statistical stuff. Is that a fair representation of kind of the sausage making that goes on behind the scenes past the client stuff?
So I think we're a little bit more modern than that. We have an app where 80% of our engagement of our panel goes through. And we also have desktop version for those demographics or people who feel that they would rather interact on a desktop. We know a lot about our members because we pay them to tell us about themselves, where they live, what their preferences are, where they shop for any category primarily, whether they engage in the cannabis market, if they're homeowners, you name it, we have right into sexual preference, anything that the member would like to share with us. And it's all opt-in, first party. So everyone understands how their data is stored and how precise and protected it is. And then what we would do is understand, let's say if we have a brand coming to us saying, I want to speak to medical professionals, or I want to speak to mothers with 2 children below 5 years old, then we could screen our panel to ensure that we gather that statistically significant audience for them. And then we would serve them. They would get a notification in their app, or they would get a notification in email, and they would have the chance to either participate or not participate. And even if they took the screener and didn't qualify, they still get that smaller reward. So it's not, we've been working really hard to make sure, keeping them engaged. And also that helps the level of honesty, because if they know they're getting paid regardless of their answer, they're just going to answer honestly, because in a lot of previous platforms, you have to, if you modify your answer, you may qualify for a survey, and only if you qualify do you get the reward. So we try to remove that from it to make everything more honest.
Well, let's talk about some insights. So last week, you and Sylvain had a presentation, and you put Sylvain and I talked about it on the podcast last week, which had some really interesting observations. But what jumped out at you? You do this a lot, and you kind of admitted from your background, you've been a merchant yourself, you've been a retailer yourself, you've been in food service, so you've got a great background, not just research that you bring to this. But out of the research that you did that was published last week, anything jump out at you that was particularly interesting that you want to share with the listeners?
The research we do in the food and grocery category is always interesting to me because I didn't grow up in the grocery channel. I grew up in general merchandise with Canadian Tire as a buyer in seasonal categories. Well, they were seasonal to me, electronics, but also in Home Depot, bought D28, all of the seasonal department there. So I'm very familiar with high pressure, low margin, 80% of your revenue going through 4 or 5 weeks of the year. And that is kind of the adrenaline junkie part of my personality that really enjoyed learning in those categories. But it really applies to grocery as well, even though it is less seasonal. There are categories that are more seasonal. But what is so interesting, based on the amount of time I've been at Caddle, with COVID, we saw a lot of behavior with consolidating the shops and staying really loyal to retailers. Like you were either going to Costco weekly or you're either going to Walmart weekly to make sure that you got that whole shop in to avoid having to go to multiple stores. But it's almost a massive overcorrection, and discounting because of inflation has become really, really important. So 6 in 10 consumers we saw that always and actively seek out discounts and promotions when shopping for groceries. And had we run this study pre-COVID and middle of COVID, I'm sure it would have been very, very different results. But we're seeing, markdown items by far and away the most popular discounting strategy for retailers. And this is probably why, and explains why the Loblaw 50% to 30 back to 50 was not received well. And then another thing that's surprising for me was BOGOs. They are, not popular at all.
Buy one, get one. Buy one, get one.
Yeah, buy one, get one.
Anyone not in the trade would want to know?
Yeah, not important statistically to Canadians. So that I found that really interesting as well.
It resonates differently with different Canadians depending of your situation at home. If you're a senior, you may actually see this as, well, a problem. You're buying too much food. Yeah, exactly.
Or it's a discount strategy I can't take advantage of in my situation. Yeah, exactly. Maybe it's financial. Maybe it's just,
many people actually see it as unfair because they don't eat as much, and so there's actually the two things that are irking consumers a lot these days, other than shrinkflation, is the volume discounting.
So lots of interesting learnings, and we'll put the link to that survey again. We talked about last week. And anything else that jumped out at you about the survey? I mean, I kind of expected brand switching coming out of COVID, because we did see a fair bit of brand switching in, not necessarily in grocery, but I was looking for an item like a barbecue heater, and it wasn't at the place I usually shop, so I scoured the city. And I've never been in XYZ store before. Like we did see I guess the roots of that behavior. Would you agree?
I agree. I think if you look at apps like Reeby and Flip, they are aggregating retailers in any category. So when you go in and type in barbecue or grill, you can see every retailer that's got a product on sale that week.
Yeah.
And you're able to convert either online or in store and it really, technology is enabling consumers to find the best discounts, and this is driving that lack of loyalty, or the decrease of loyalty to those stores. And we found in this research that 62% of Canadians have switched stores or changed their habits specifically to take advantage of these discounts.
It's a fascinating point, and then I just want to move on to where we can get in touch with you, and then pass the mic back to Sylvain. But in the old days, like 10 years ago, everybody would have what Reeby and Flip offered today. They'd get a big envelope full of all the flyers, right? Yeah. And they'd spread them out on the kitchen table, and they'd go, I need a barbecue, and they'd just flip through. And that's missing today. Like a lot of retailers.
There's no time for that.
Well, I don't know. See, I don't know. I don't know. I think that's an artificial construct. I think people miss them. I think it's a very inefficient medium, but I don't know. Anyway, I think.
Well, you know what, Mike? We're going to ask the panel that question next week for you.
Do you miss flyers?
And then we can talk about this next time. Do you miss paper flyers?
Yeah.
We should do a bet, because I think it's a hard no for the millennials and younger. I think Gen X is still kind of flying under the radar on this. But boomers, I agree that they like it's like a Sunday activity.
Yeah,
or Saturday morning activity.
By the way, boomers have the money. All right, let's wrap up.
And Gen X's don't matter, so
right.
It's okay. It's all good. We like flying under the radar.
I know exactly.
There we go.
There you go.
There we go. All right, listen. Last question. I'll pass the mic back to Sylvain. As people are listening, maybe there's some folks out there who want to learn more about either participating as in your panels or asking your panels question. How do they get in touch with you or learn more about Caddle?
So if you're a member or if you're a Canadian consumer and you want to take part in our surveys and leave reviews for all the products that we find on your receipts, getcaddle.com is how you get us. Download the app or the web-based app. And to speak to any of our team about anything, we're a small team of 19 Canadians, we're spread out through the country. So we're in multiple time zones. You can get us at askcaddle.com or Colleen.Martin at askcaddle or at caddle.ca. We are here for you if you have any suggestions, concerns, you want to run some research, have a question about any research that we've provided on the LinkedIn platform, happy to help.
So it's Caddle, CADDLE, not CATTLE.
Right.
You're not a beef provider.
Your brain goes there because you're allergic to beef.
Well, yeah, exactly. So, at first when I saw Caddle, okay, is this? Are you guys misspelling a word I know? Or
Ransom tells this story better. We'll get him on one of these months, and he can tell you how Caddle.
Oh, he's told me his story, and it's
with
great.
Wozniak. It's a great story.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Well, listen, you're going to be back on the show on a regular basis with some fresh data. You'll be collecting data for us. For me and Mike. So talking about some fresh data every now and then. So we're looking forward to your next visit, Colleen. Thank you for joining us today.
It was a pleasure, guys. You're my favorite group of guys to talk to, and I'm really looking forward to the next year.
Beyond Meat, bloody awful results, basically.
Was that a pun?
It was an attempt at one anyway. I suffered a loss of 300. I'm just looking at the numbers here. It's 300 lost. Ka-ching. 338.1 million during fiscal 23.
It's bleeding money.
On sales of 343 million. They took an impairment charge trying to right-size the business. Now, 2023...
No, they are going to be right-sizing the business, which is why the stock went up this week. It's up to $10 now.
2022 wasn't much better. They lost $366 million in sales of 419, so their top line's down. In other news, I just set fire to a pile of cash, would be my perspective around investing in Beyond Meat. Now, I also saw in the news, I wanted to tie this together with Maple Leaf Food, merge their plant-based protein divisions with their protein division. So is this a one of these moments of clarity for the plant-based industry? Will this cause and catalyze the change? Or we've talked about this before. What's your assessment of what you're seeing with Beyond Meat? Does it surprise you? And what do you think happens next?
Well, first of all, I think 6 years ago we were in the middle of the Beyond Meat invasion, and I think we owe a lot to Beyond Meat. I think they actually brought forward a really intriguing agenda, and it got us all to think more about proteins in general, whether it's animal, vegetable, doesn't matter. It got everyone to think about proteins. It got food service to think about proteins a little bit differently. It brought grocers to think about proteins, and I still think it's a work in progress. But we are seeing better products out there. We are seeing better food science to support some of these
healthier products. We talked about it last week. How there was a new formulation that had less complicated,
fewer
less
products,
stuff.
Yeah. So I think we're going in the right direction, and I don't think that the plant-based space. I don't like plant-based, by the way. I that's why I always talk about the animal-vegetable play in proteins, because if you talk to beef producers or hog producers, they'll argue that their product is plant-based as well. So that's why the lexicon is evolving, I think. But in essence, I actually do think that there's a bright future for vegetable-based proteins in general. There's better research, but Beyond Meat is actually going to pay the big price for bringing forward the agenda, and it's likely going to be the victim, because the one mistake that Beyond Meat did, which I think was critical, is that they came into the market saying, you know what, we're going to replace the things that consumers actually love, which is beef, chicken, and pork. You're going to like our product without the guilt. And that was the wrong thing to do, because people actually like meat. And of course, it was not processed. And in most cases, it was cheaper. So why? What was the business model? Asking someone to buy something more expensive that may not taste the same? I don't know. So I think really that message went awry, and they're paying for it.
Well, I think in the business lexicon or language, they overestimated their addressable market. In other words, they thought it was what you've called flexitarians and vegetarians who might enjoy the taste of beef, but I'm not a big beef eater, to say the least, and I don't miss the taste. I don't even remember what it tastes like. So, you're down to a very narrow set of people who perhaps decide that they don't want to eat beef and they want to eat more plant-based, but wanted it to taste like beef. So I think it's, questionable about the size of the addressable market, and that kind of got, they got ahead of their skis, I think.
A little bit, yeah. But anyways, I do think that we owe a lot to Beyond Meat for what they did, but they did actually miss out on the messaging. They got people enthusiastic. I mean, you can look around. I mean, people were enthusiastic 6 years ago.
Sure.
The company was worth billions.
Yeah. I mean, we see that a lot, with unicorns, so to speak, that, they're pioneers, right? And when you're out first, sometimes you're going to take the hits first, and
But I think the next era of vegetable proteins is going to be even more exciting, because that's when you're going to see the real science take over. I mean, what Beyond Meat did was to actually create a mixture of different sources and add ingredients to replicate the taste and the texture of the real thing. But now with food science, what I'm seeing with some startups that I'm mentoring is that we're seeing people taking a step back, looking at the ingredients and say, how can we naturalize this thing with food science, improve the product, and make it less expensive? And that's the language I like.
Yeah. And a thinner ingredient deck, let's face it, right? You just need to compete with
a clean label. A clean
label, thinner ingredient deck, all those things. And you're right. They did start and were a catalyst to a trend. So we wish them best of luck. Maybe they can turn it around, and a bunch of smart people.
Full
no doubt.
Full disclosure: we're not shareholders of Beyond Meat.
We are.
I'm not a shareholder of any agri-food company. So there you go.
There you go. Speaking of agri-food, I guess we were together last week in Halifax. It was wonderful to see you.
Yes.
We'll be together again. The next time we'll be together is in May in the wonderful city of Montreal for Cial. So we'll be the official podcast this year again for Cial. I'm looking forward to seeing what's new and innovative coming out of around the world. It's a great show.
Yeah,
I know it's a favorite show of yours, and we'll be doing lots of interviews and chit and chat.
I actually did a webinar for our Austrian friends yesterday with Joanne MacArthur, and so we were talking about the Canadian market, and so I'm going to be back with them next week. So I've been working with a few Austrian companies.
Very innovative.
A while. It's been interesting.
Yeah, the home of Red Bull. I didn't know much about them until we met them in the podcast studio here in Toronto last year, and I was very impressed by the lineup, the product, very forward thinking, and it just shows
spec.
Their home run. That country's very so to speak, punches above their weights, and they had a huge home run with Red Bull, which again just fostered a whole interest in that country, and they do a great job.
But you can tell they don't necessarily talk about it because Red Bull is so big. I mean, it's just massive, right? So,
sure.
So in agri-food in Austria, they want to push the next one, the next Red Bull.
Yeah.
And
of course.
So and so when you go to their display at Cial, there's no mention of Red Bull.
Yeah,
nothing. True. Have you ever had Mozart chocolate from Austria?
I don't think so. So if the Austrians are listening, I'll have my car in Montreal. I'm driving. That's all I'll say.
Mozart chocolate from Salzburg.
Anybody listening? God. Anybody who's going to be there listening? Anyway, listen, we're meandering on a bit. I did want to congratulate a recent person that we interviewed from the food business. Erin Ashley has just been nominated for the RBC Women of Influence Awards by RBC. So congratulations to Erin.
Oh, excellent.
Great interview, and she runs Erin Wellness Nutraceuticals. Does a great job. So she was a guest and just had this a nice nomination. Great for an entrepreneur on the West Coast. So congrats to Erin, and let's leave it there for this week. Great busy week with lots of lessons to be learned, I think, for everyone. But until next week, I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer growth consultant, podcaster, keynote speaker, and you are?
And I'm the food professor, Sylvain Charlebois.
Safe travels, everybody, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right. Bye-bye.